I have another question from Antonio Delgado. He's an instructional designer for the University of Puerto Rico in Arecibo. And he asked, using an open document that Bernabé Soto created yesterday, I think. And the question is the following. What is the difference between a PLE and a PLN?
Sure.
Personal learning environments and personal learning networks.
Okay, well that's the course that we're doing right now. Let me just quickly dig that up here. Yeah, that's a course right now. We're looking at personal learning environments and personal learning networks. Week one really looked at PLEs and PLNs. So the first suggestion I would offer is if you go into the discussion form of the course and you look at, by the way, this is the value of explicit artifacts, right? If this is a regular class and you had the conversation, then it's gone. You can't point to it anymore. But once it's been made explicit, you can now use it as a learning tool down the road. So in this case, instead of me having to fully answer that question for him, I can instead say, if you go to this forum in week one, there's 140 replies to people who I asked the question exactly that. You know, what are the difference between this? And so I would suggest, if you want a broad perspective, this is where you would go. And you could have some discussions or topics that try and compare PLEs and PLNs and whatever else, including some graphics and images. Short answer, my view. A PLE is literally the environment or the ecology. It's partly conceptual. It's not necessarily tool-based. So there's principles such as learner autonomy that are at play, and it relates to how you design a learning experience would be influenced from a PLE perspective. A PLN, on the other hand, is the social network that you form through technology. Now, both PLE and PLN will have tools that'll be utilized, you know, whether it's Facebook or blogs or social networking services. But by and large, that's the distinction. One relates to a set of principles and the environment in which learning happens. The second relates to the structure of the learning system that we've created.
Thank you. And another one, I do not know if there's someone else who wants to ask something. I do have another question, and it comes from Elvin Candelaria Cortez. He's another student from our program, and he asks, what is your point of view about informal learning and mobile learning? What does this postulates? These ideas, okay, what does these ideas represent in connectivism?
Okay. Well, mobile learning I see partly as a medium. I mean, admittedly, there are some things about it that are unique in that each technology has different affordances, right? So there are certain things you can do better with mobile learning and that you can do better with a laptop, for example. I mean, I find if I have a long email to type, I have a choice, mobile phone or laptop. So I'm going to use the device that best suits a particular task. So from that perspective, I see the mobile learning element as critical because, you know, if you still call an iPad a mobile, you know, it's kind of in between world. But even now, I mean, you look at the first computer I bought for the low cost of, I think, $4,000 was an IBM. It had a 40 megabyte hard drive. It was huge. And you know what I loved about it? I didn't have to take those floppy 5 1/4 inch floppies or whatever, and each time I wanted to run a new program, I didn't have to pull that disk out and put another disk in. I had 40 megabytes to play with on my desktop. It was amazing, which means I could load a program and just launch it directly from the hard disk. Now, today, this has more RAM than that did as a device, and that's, what, 15 years ago. So I guess the point I'm trying to emphasize is what a mobile device is now is far more powerful than what a desktop computer was 7, 8 years ago. So you can do a lot more with this, especially when you start looking at location-based computing, augmented reality, and I do think, you know, especially with this concept of the X-Web, you know, the extended web, we're starting to blend our physical and our virtual worlds. So they're sort of coming together where information interactions I have online get layered on top of physical spaces. Foursquare is a simple illustration, but if you have an augmented reality browser like Layer, that similarly allows you to lay information on top of physical structures. So it would be realistic, and certainly has been done, where you can walk by a building in a certain region and you point your phone at the building and it'll know where you are and what you're pointing at, and it will say, oh, in 1928 this building looked like this, and it will give you a picture of that building and a picture of that street. So that's where you're basically putting information on top of the physical realm, and you can customize it and strip it away based on whatever it is that you want. So there's huge potential for mobiles. Informal learning, it's a funny word, right? Because I don't know if there's such a thing as informal learning. I mean, I think all learning, whether it's in a classroom or not, but I think, certainly lifelong learning, if I can exchange informal with that, is a vital, component of just personal satisfaction. You read studies that say, well, for people as they age, it's important that they continue to learn, for impacting or some early indications that it assists with delay of Alzheimer's, for example. If you're an active learner, continually thinking and experimenting. And there's also an adrenaline release, I think, to a degree. I mean, there's something very empowering and satisfying about understanding a concept that was confusing at one time. By the same account, I don't know whether our society is becoming more educated by being better connected. And what I mean by that is, today, I mean, how many of you have seen a TED Talk in the room here, a video or something? Okay, at least a couple. So TED Talks are, I think, an interesting knowledge-sharing tool in our society today, because you can get important ideas and concepts that are shared very quickly through these video channels. What does that mean if a society has access to leading thinkers in the world, where I can be in a conversation and somebody will say, oh yeah, I heard Ken Robinson or whatever talk about creativity and learning. I mean, that ready access to leading thinkers of the world, what's the impact of that? Because it's easy to watch a 10-minute video, a lot easier for that matter to watch a video of that duration than it is to read a book. So the question is, that kind of distillation, is that informal or lifelong learning, and does that increase the intellectual capacity of a society as a whole? If you look at Johnson's argument that ideas need to come in contact with each other for innovation, then I would say it's hugely positive. Connectivism, network learning, lifelong learning, mobile learning has tremendous impact.
Thank you. ¿Alguien adicional que tenga que hacer alguna pregunta?
No, I'm saying that you have Sugata Mitra as part of your students, and I think there is some kind of beauty in all this thing, because I knew about Sumata Mitra from Mario Nunez, who is in Mayagüez right now, and it was due because Antonio invited me to work with him in his project, and so that's how I knew about Mitra. And now Mitra is in your course, and Tony is in your course too. Antonio and Alfredo, who's here, is also in your course, and so it's like we can share. And Stephen Downs is there. Oh, so it's like
Yeah.
You're sharing with the whole world, from people from everywhere, and as Antonio said the other week, it was like, yes, I mean, you can have the big, the big names within your network and be part of them, and they can, be close to you too. So I don't think that previous environments for learning provided this. I think there is a beauty within all this too.
Well, I mean, I'm opinionated, so I agree. There's something fascinating, and sometimes too, I mean, if you look at a list like this and you see, like I mentioned, I just ran through a few names of countries, and the first time we did CCK08, I think we counted and we had about 50 countries, like 50 countries represented. I have no idea how many we have in this course here. I imagine it's probably close. But there is something interesting about that. And there's something interesting in that it's so much easier to access the thinking of other people without having to jump through all kinds of hoops. I mean, so today, for example, let's say you have a textbook that Terry Anderson, for example, has written The Theory and Practice of Online Learning. It's a free PDF textbook. You can purchase or download it. And, but how far is, if you ask that question, how far is Terry Anderson away from a grad student today versus how far he was away 10 years ago? And by that I mean just in terms of general access. How hard is it for you to get a hold of someone like Terry Anderson today versus 10 years ago? And I'll say it is an order of magnitude. I mean, it's so much harder 10 years ago than it is today. Because now, if you are so inclined, you can follow Terry on his blog. If you're so inclined, you can follow him on Twitter. He's not that active on Twitter, but you could. You can follow him on SlideShare, where he posts presentations that he's done. 10 years ago, how would you get a hold of him? You know what, you send him an email? Maybe that's one way, but now you're asking him questions, right? In this way here, what the internet allows us to do, to keep doing what we're doing, and to have other people just tack on to it and follow us along, and other points we're following them. So it's not just like, everybody follow person X. It's not that way. It's like there's a joint relationship there. So I do agree. It's on one level, there's a thing of beauty to this sense that we can have a global course with individuals, educators, innovative thinkers from around the world, and it's so accessible to students that it just simply wasn't there even less than a decade ago. So I think it's fascinating.